Two situations are necessary for sexual selection. One is male dominance, and the other is female choice. So here, we're going to look at male dominance. There's three forms of male dominance. One is simply competitive mate searching, where males just search for, it could be acres, it could be hundreds of miles, depending on the species, for females. They just compete with other males by searching out females. A second factor is sperm competition. So one aspect of this is sperm storage. In other words, once a male inseminates a female, there is no fertilization that takes place immediately. Instead, the sperm are stored for varying periods of time, depending on the species. And a second aspect of sperm competition is sperm ejection by the female. One great example of this is actually in cockroaches, where they exhibit incredible sperm storage. They mate once, but they reproduce for life.
Entomologist Ron Harrison heads up the cockroach extermination lab at the Orkin Training Center in Atlanta. To come up with ways to kill these ultimate survivors, Harrison spends his days studying the species most commonly found in homes.
95% of all cockroach problems in urban situations are German cockroaches. They're very quick in their reproductive abilities, and therefore that helps them become resistant to products that we actually use to try to get rid of them. Once a female has had sex and has that sperm, she's able there to hold it and then fertilize as she needs, rather than have to have sex again.
Because of this one adaptation, the female needs to mate only once to remain pregnant for the rest of her life. Her one act of sex can yield hundreds of thousands of offspring, a remarkable ratio. This benefits the female in more ways than one.
Mating in itself is costly. The more a female mates, the lower her probability of survival. Perhaps because there's some damage that occurs, they might be at risk of predation, and there's even some seminal fluids that carry toxins that decrease female survival.
After her one act of sex, the female carries fertilized eggs with her throughout her entire life. So every female in the colony has the potential to become a colony herself.
In pest control, what's really scary to us then is if you happen to have a German cockroach in the cuff of your pants or in your pocket or in a box that comes from the grocery store and it happens to be a pregnant female, that's all that's needed to get an entire population going.
This adaptation has given the species the ultimate survival advantage.
When you look at the whole evolution of animals, these started out 400 million years ago and are continuing to be very successful. You know, when it comes to looking at reproductive biology, you've got to say that cockroaches are a superstar.
Yeah, these German cockroaches are really a nightmare. I have firsthand experience with that as an undergraduate at the University of Florida. Florida equals cockroaches of all kinds of species. And me and my roommate were unlucky enough to live in an off-campus apartment that was infested with German cockroaches, and the landlord would not do anything about it. So we relented and lived with them and just bought paper plates and plastic glasses to eat and drink off of, because there was no way of keeping these things away from our cupboards and all kinds of stuff. They were just everywhere. Quite a nightmare. So if we look at sperm ejection, here's a situation where subordinates will mate with a hen. There they are, mating with the hen. Okay. She's storing their sperm. Now, when a dominant male comes along and mates with her, guess what? She ejects the sperm of the subordinate males so they won't inseminate her, and then accepts the sperm of the dominant male. Clearly a superior being. Well, in her eyes. And we see the same thing happening in hedge sparrows.
For just 1 week during the British springtime, one of our commonest birds behaves in the strangest way. In his suburban garden, Professor Nick Davies decided to take a closer look at the humble dunnock or hedge sparrow after reading a very curious observation printed in a bird book written 80 years ago. Nick Davies takes up the story.
I made a curious and very intimate observation on the nuptial habits. A pair of these little birds came out of the shrubbery in a state of great sexual excitement. The hen elevated her rump and stood still, when the male made little excited and very wanton-looking pecks in this region. There was no mistaking the nature and significance of the actions, rather lecherousness. This is a very remarkable thing to have seen, I think, but I don't understand it. During egg-laying, you often see dunnocks going round in threes, and what this is a female with 2 males, and the female tries to make sure that both the males mate with her. And she might actually copulate maybe 10 or 15 times per hour. But the males battle for paternity, and this, I think, is where the extraordinary cloaca pecking comes in. You can see that the female's cloaca makes pumping movements. It goes bright red, and then occasionally she does a little dip with her tail, and when she does a dip she extrudes a droplet. And I can still remember my intense excitement when I saw a droplet being extruded for the first time. I immediately got on my hands and knees and began to look for these droplets, and the very first one I found, by chance, had landed on a small piece of bark. And I rushed back to the laboratory and looked at the droplet under a microscope, and I was absolutely thrilled to discover that it did indeed contain bundles of sperm. I think what's going on is that with the frequent matings by 2 males, the female's sperm stores become full, and so the only chance the male has of making room for his own insemination is first to clear the way. So by encouraging the female to eject sperm from previous matings, he increases the chance that his mating will fertilize the female's eggs. Once the chicks hatch, provided both males have mated, then they'll both cooperate to feed the chicks. And with help from 2 husbands, the female's chicks get better fed, and so it's of great advantage to her.
So how cool is that? The female is ejecting sperm. The unsuspecting male whose sperm was ejected doesn't know that, and so he's helping bring food back to the nest. That's his offspring. Guess what? They're not. And so everybody benefits except that poor male. Now, competition can also affect sperm production. And we see that in Norway rats, where a male rat, a rival male rat, will increase the sperm production of the original rat. So here we have a rat, and it's producing a normal amount of sperm. Now, if there are rival males in the vicinity, that original male will start to produce even more sperm. So that increases the likelihood that it will successfully inseminate a female. Well, the third major form of male dominance is simply overt conflict, battling it out with other males.
Nothing gets more serious than this. At a speed of 30 miles an hour, they power towards each other and collide with the force of a head-on car smash. The females can only look on, while the males sort out their differences, just as they have done for centuries. Each clash sends massive shockwaves through their bodies. Injury and death are a very real possibility. But at the base of their horns is one of nature's greatest shock absorbers, protecting their small brains from the full force of the impact. Each round can last up to 20 brain-numbing smashes until, eventually, one backs down and is banished from the competition. There's no mating for losers.
And yes, we see the same kind of overt conflict in beetles. Now what's going on, you can't see it in this particular view, is that the female is watching these two guys battle it out. And she will choose the winner of the bout as a mate. From the beetle's standpoint, every bit as vicious as the muskoxen butting heads. And it gets really intense when we look at seals. Here's a whole bunch of seals on a beach. And here are two males battling it out. These battles get incredibly fierce, but interestingly, nobody gets seriously hurt, even though it looks like they do. The result of all these battles is that, well, at least the results of one study, and all other studies have been, plus or minus these results here. In this one study, 4 of the 71 males, in other words, only 6% of the males on this island, were responsible for inseminating most of the 120 females. In other words, only the most dominant males, the winners of these competitions, are the ones that are going to successfully reproduce with the females. So we have a subordinate male challenging a dominant male. and the subordinate backs down. Now, as battles go, that was mild. That was really mild. That one was obviously more intense, but again, it's very rare that a male would suffer any kind of major damage from this kind of situation. Okay, so believe it or not, as deadly as those battles appear to be, even though in reality they're not, what really is deadly is what goes on with bees.
Male Dawson's bees. The females are only just emerging, burrowing their way one by one out of the tunnels where they hatched and grew up, and their scent inflames the males. They are huge and built for fighting, and each one wants to be in the best position to mate with a female. A female emerges and immediately there's a brawl as every male tries to reach her. It's very rare for animals to kill their own kind in combat, but stinging and biting rivals to death is usually the only way these male bees get a female. A winner manages to claim a female, and the pair race for cover. Meanwhile, the female's lingering scent drives one unsuccessful male into a deadly frenzy. Another female, caught in the middle of another brawl, becomes an accidental casualty. By the time the last female has emerged, every male is dead. The battles have ensured that the strongest males will have mated with the most females.
So, there you have it. Male dominance, fighting it out among themselves, one of the components that we see in sexual selection.